This is the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 79, where we're going to talk about the state of the nation of the cloud wars, recorded live May 22nd, 2015. Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, the only place to stay up to date on everything going on in the Microsoft Cloud world, including Windows Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Lync, and related technologies. Just the information, no marketing, no BS. I'm Chris Johnson.
And I'm Andrew Cole.
And we're just two dudes telling you how we see it. Good morning, AC.
Hey, CJ, how's it going?
Very well, my friend. Very well. How about yourself?
It's doing good. I thought it was supposed to stop being so busy once we got past these Ignite and Build conferences.
Yeah. Somebody failed to tell my inbox to stop telling me things.
No kidding, man. It's been crazy. So, we were a little delayed doing this recording this week.
Yeah. In fairness, it has slowed down a little bit for me, but mostly it's been catching up on stuff that just dropped on the floor while I've been busy the last few weeks. So yeah, I feel like I'm slowly climbing back up on top of the pile, but it doesn't help. It's starting to get sunny outside. It looks beautiful outside, and that's not helping.
No, it doesn't. Don't want to be inside right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This week I was out at the Dev Intersection conference out in Scottsdale, Arizona, which again, weather was beautiful, and so got to see a couple people, and actually recorded a brief interview, or I guess a longer interview with Jeremy Thake on his Office 365 podcast, where we talked about a couple different random things. Jeremy, Richard Deserga, and Mike Fitzmaurice. We did a cool little interview there. So
yeah, it looked like a very nice venue from the photos. I was very jealous.
It is beautiful, man. It was like a resort. It was really nice. I mean, it backed up to TPC, I guess, Phoenix, the Phoenix Open.
Oh, yeah.
Which is known as like a really rowdy golf tournament. They get like 100 some odd thousand people to come out just for like one day. I think that's what somebody told me. But they get a ridiculous number of people that come out, and it's just a giant like tailgate party kind of a thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, I also heard you were interviewed on Startups for the Rest of Us.
Yes, I was actually. That was really fun. That was I had a really good discussion with them about information products or info products. So the video training that I do, the on-demand video training that I do, is classified as an info product, and so they were looking for someone to talk about. Actually, I'm in the community with them, and then some guys started talking about video training and info products. I chimed in to the forum, and I said a few things and answered a bunch of questions for people, and it was kind of cool that they reached out to me and said, "Can you make a full-time living off this?" I'm like, "Well, I am." So it was, and it depends on what you call full-time. I mean, everybody's dollar amount for full-time income is different. So
yeah, gotcha.
But it was really cool. So yeah, it was an interview we did. I got a nice little write-up on my blog, and it was really neat. So just the decision process on how I'm host all my stuff with Pluralsight right now, and some other options of things that that I've been kind of looking at. I'd like to try my hand at the marketing of my own stuff. So
nice.
Yeah.
Hey, before we get into the news, I got one thing I'd like to drop in here. Given we've just both been at Build conference a couple of weeks ago, there is actually a Build tour, a world tour going on. For those of you who didn't make Build, it's a one-day agenda, I guess, for want of a better word, and they're in 26 locations around the world. So far there's been London, New York, Moscow, Atlanta, Sao Paulo, and I think today is in Berlin, in Germany. Then we've got Toyota, Mexico City, Singapore, Austin, Auckland, New Zealand, Sydney, Seoul, Paris, Shanghai, Amsterdam, Beijing, Prague, Mumbai, Bangalore, Milan, Chicago, Chicago, Johannesburg, Toronto, LA, and Hong Kong between now and the 20th of June, 19th of June, finishing in Hong Kong.
Very cool.
So if you're in those cities, you can go to www.build15.com and you can go see what the deal is. I don't actually know. I can't see if it's a paid thing or not. Let's have a look.
I'm pretty sure it's free.
It's a free event. Yeah, there you go.
I think it's done by the DX, the old DPE group.
Yes.
Kind of got there to try and evangelize more of the content like in person. So it's not the same. I think it's some of the same speakers, but I think they recruit people from the areas to redo some of the content, some subject matter experts in the area to redo some of the content.
Yeah, gotcha. And I think they're also sending From what I heard, they're sending people around the place as well.
Yeah. There's a few people that do travel for it. So
yeah, nice.
Yeah. I got a bit of a funny. You want to hear a funny?
Of course.
So I found this. This is it takes a second to read this, but as a developer, I think it's kind of nails it. So it's called His Diary and Her Diary. Have you heard of this?
Oh, I think I might have. Yeah.
So here's her diary. Tonight, I thought my husband was acting weird. We had made plans to meet at a nice restaurant for dinner. I was shopping with my friends all day long, so I thought he was upset at the fact that I was a bit late, but he made no comment on it. Conversation wasn't flowing, so I suggested that we go somewhere quiet so we could talk. He agreed, but he didn't say much. I asked him what was wrong, and he said nothing. I asked him if it was my fault that he was upset. He said he wasn't upset, that he had nothing to do with me and not to worry about it. On the way home, I told him I loved him, and he smiled slightly and kept driving. I can't explain this behavior, and I don't know why he didn't say, I love you too. When we got home, I felt like I lost him completely, as if he wanted nothing to do with me anymore. He just sat there quietly and watched TV. He's continued to seem distant and absent, and finally, with silence all around us, I decided to go to bed. And about 15 minutes later, he came to bed, but I still felt that he was distracted and his thoughts were somewhere else. He fell asleep. I cried. I don't know what to do, and I'm almost sure that his thoughts are with someone else. My life is a disaster. Now, I'm going to tweak his diary a bit just for the developers out there. His diary, build's broken, don't know why. The real one was motorcycle won't start, can't figure out why. But I saw that and I'm like, that is so true. That's my house. My poor wife does that same thing.
Yeah, seriously. I catch myself doing the exact same thing. I'm walking around. I'm very quiet and to myself and thinking about things in my head. And I'm obviously looking like a complete reject to the rest of those around me. And all I can think of, I wonder why this programming problem isn't working out. Like, how do I fix this? What's going on with that? Yeah, it was really strange.
You just go into a little silo there, and it's like, I'm in my own world, and everything else is around me going, no, I'm working on something right now.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so we got a couple of big report things to talk about. Should we dive into this?
Yeah, let's do it. So you the first one you found, what you want to do a Magic Quadrant, or you want to do?
Yeah, let's do the Gartner thing first. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Gartner, they're an analyst organization, right? So they basically they consult to businesses around the world and on all sorts of different matters. And some of those are around cloud infrastructure. And so what they do is they compile a report. They do a whole bunch of research, and they go interview the different providers and ask them lots of different questions. And then they talk to customers, obviously, and all of that sort of stuff. And then they go and compile a big, long report about sort of the state of the nation as it relates to a particular topic. And so in this case, it's the Cloud Infrastructure as a Service Magic Quadrant. And so what the Magic Quadrant is much like a sort of a SWOT analysis with the four sort of sections of a quadrant, the four quadrants, I should say, of that sort of that diagram. Mm-hmm. They do the same thing, but they call it the Magic Quadrant. And so the four sections are basically the up and down axis is ability to execute. So the higher up your axis you are, the more ability they think you have to execute. And then along the bottom axis is called completeness of vision. And so this sort of means how complete is your offering, or where are you heading with your offering, that sort of thing. And so the four quadrants, the top left, which would be high ability to execute, lower completeness of vision, is called challenges. The bottom left quadrant is called niche players, which have a lower ability to execute, lower completeness of vision. The top right is the leaders quadrant, so that's high ability to execute and high completeness of vision. And then the lower right is called visionaries, which is high completeness of vision, lower ability to execute. And when I say low, it doesn't mean they suck at executing. It just means that it's a continuum, right? It's not just an on and an off. You could be right at the bottom of that ability to execute, or right at the top of the ability to execute, and all of the bits are in between. There's no sort of, what's the right word, segmented scale
right.
Up that axis.
Yeah.
And so they basically put a little dot, like a scatter chart, I guess, for want of a better word, a dot for each of the players on this Magic Quadrant. And this is really important for people because there's a lot of really big customers that talk to analysts about, or consult with them about their requirements, and then who would be the best to sort of help meet those requirements. And so they turn to these analysts to find out. And so it's really important for folks. They notice it and they put a lot of effort into into it. And so that report for this year has just come out. And we'll link off to it in the show notes. The analysts are Linda Leong, Douglas Toombs, and Bob Gill from Gartner.
Good job on those names. those are tongue twisters.
Yeah, I started that and I was like, oh God, what have I started? And so we'll put a note up, we'll put a link to it in the show notes, but it's up on the Gartner website. And it's called Magic Quadrant for Cloud Infrastructure as a Service Worldwide. Now, the important part here is it's not just all cloud, right? As they say in the title, it's infrastructure as a service only. So this is, VMs, networks, that sort of stuff, right? It's the virtualization IaaS part of an offering. It's not the PaaS part. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think they might be coming out with a PaaS one later on. Don't quote me on that. But it's possible.
Yeah, they said that this one covers hybrid IaaS and PaaS solutions, but they don't evaluate PaaS because there's a totally separate report they're going to do about PaaS.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so I think that's important to keep in mind, right? Because some providers are better than others at PaaS and IaaS and things. So, but in general, so being vast generalization, Amazon Web Services sort of ekes out ahead on completeness of vision of Microsoft, and is definitely sort of streaks ahead in terms of ability to execute, which, from my biased and highly opinionated point of view, I'm not sure I agree with ability to execute as much as they do, but they've got a large lead in this, in IaaS, I should say, or, got a number of years sort of head start on things. So it's no surprise that I think they're still ahead on these things.
Yeah, it's looking at the quadrant. I mean, we'll put the link in the show notes so everybody can go take a look at the graphic that they put up. And I mean, I've always seen, I agree. I think that the industry has always seen as AWS as leading with an IaaS offering for their cloud offering. Microsoft, to me, has always led with their PaaS offering, and then they have an IaaS business. But I mean, I agree with you. I see there's a big gap between the ability to execute. I mean, I think if the chart makes sense if you're looking at maybe the size of the business in terms of how many customers or what the revenue is or how many VMs that they have. But I mean, to me, I would really be curious to see a true comparison of, as far as IaaS goes, between AWS and Microsoft. What does one have that the other one does not have?
Yeah.
Because to me, it looks like I keep looking at all the stuff that Azure has, and I'm like, what are they missing? Because it seems like they're on par, and it's kind of which one do you prefer to go with? Would you rather go with Microsoft or would you rather go with AWS? I mean, it's not a question of do you want Windows or not, because even Satya, Microsoft CEO, said earlier this year, that 20% of the VMs running inside of Microsoft's IaaS story are Linux-based VMs. So the chart is interesting to me. I mean, it's obviously they've done the research and they're the ones that are the analysts, but it seems to me that they're much closer than they show the gap. But the big thing to notice is how much farther ahead both of them are to the rest of the industry.
Well, yeah, that's definitely worth pointing out, right? The only two providers or services, I should say, in the leaders quadrant, which is the sort of the coveted quadrant in any Magic Quadrant that you want to be in, is AWS and Microsoft. So some of the other players, just for sort of to help folks get a feeling for who else is in this report, we've got other players. Google, the most notable, are down in they're in the visionaries quadrant, which is just the one below the leaders quadrant. They're pretty close, in their ability to execute. They're up there, but not quite over the halfway point and into the leaders quadrant. So, they've got a little way to go, obviously, but they're not sucking there. CenturyLink, kind of same sort of level of ability to execute, roughly the same as Rackspace, is a little higher, but Rackspace is further back on the completeness of vision. So it's in the niche players quadrant, which is kind of interesting.
The one thing I thought was notable is that there's no one in the challengers quadrant.
Yeah.
You've got two leaders that are the ability to execute and completeness of vision, but they didn't consider anybody a challenger. Rackspace comes close, but I found that to be pretty telling that, it's like between Rackspace and Google and IBM and VMware that they don't put them anywhere near in the challenging space.
I'm gonna say something controversial here for a second, and I would say in Rackspace's case, as the huge worldwide players, right, like AWS, Microsoft, and Google ramp up on this, nobody else has got a show in hell of really competing head to head. And so now I think if I was Rackspace, I'd be focusing a little more and becoming a little more niche, right? Maybe that's a strategy of them to say, hey, we're not going to try and compete just on like lowest cost virtualization or storage or what have you with the real giants in the room, and we're going to niche down a little bit and really provide some more specialized services. So I have no idea if that's accurate or not, but that could be that could be something that's happening.
Well, remember that we had a conversation many episodes ago with Jeff DeVerta from Rackspace, where we talked about what was their offering when you compare them to like Office 365 or to Azure or to AWS, and the thing that was unique about them compared to AWS and Microsoft and Google is that they saw themselves as much more of as the ability to help with the hybrid story.
Yeah.
So if you want to do, like, let's just take SharePoint, for example, because I think it's got the classic, do I go hybrid or do I stay on-prem or do I go in the cloud debate going on. And Rackspace says, hey, look, one of the things about staying on-prem is that you've got to feed and water the servers. You've got to maintain those things. Give them to us. Let us go through and do that. And you can take advantage of a hybrid scenario. We become really good at deploying hybrid options. But then we also can help you get to Office 365 as well. And oh yeah, by the way, you don't have to feed more of the servers. We'll take care of that. So essentially they've turned into like a managed services and then a specialty around hybrid.
Yeah.
Hey, what was that? There was another number in here that you noticed too that was really interesting.
Yeah, in terms of market share. So they had some data in here, and I'll just caveat this with I haven't read the report in its entirety, so I don't know how they came to this conclusion, but that'll be interesting. Maybe somebody else knows better than I do. But in terms of market share, it says the overwhelming market share leader with over 10 times more cloud IaaS compute capacity in use than the aggregate total of the 14 other providers in this Magic Quadrant is Amazon.
That includes Microsoft.
That includes Microsoft, right? So it says 10 times more compute capacity than all of the others combined.
Wow!
In AWS. First up, how do they get that data? Because that seems like really confidential stuff. Like,
yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know how they get that. But then ZOMG, man. Holy smoke. That's a big number.
Yeah. What about the other number too? What was the other one that you saw that you were telling me about?
Yeah. So there was a Microsoft spokesperson that said in a statement, Azure offers more than twice as much cloud IaaS compute capacity in use as the aggregate total of the remaining providers in the Magic Quadrant other than AWS. So AWS has 10 times more compute capacity than everybody else combined, we should say. It's not like more than Azure. It's like Azure plus Rackspace plus CenturyLink plus all of that. And then Microsoft, who sort of looks second in the Magic Quadrant, has twice as much compute capacity as all of the other IaaS providers combined.
That's like one guy winning the marathon. It takes on average, it takes like the record holders to do a 26-mile marathon about 2.5 hours ish to finish a marathon. So that's like Amazon is like the guy that finishes first. The second place guy is finishing like a good solid hour or hour and a half after him, and then everybody else is finishing 5 hours after that.
Yeah.
So it's like it shows that this guy is so far in the lead. This next guy is way behind the leader, but still way out in front, and then everybody else comes in. I mean, that's pretty darn amazing.
It is incredible. Like it's logarithmic almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. Like I said, we'll link to the report. It's quite long, and it goes into details on each of the vendors in the quadrant, what their strengths and weaknesses are. So, for example, in AWS, it talks about the 10 times more capacity and talks about it being a thought leader, extraordinarily innovative and exceptionally agile and responsive and da-da-da-da-da. And then it's got some cautions, complex vendor to manage, and that it's spreading its efforts very broadly. So it goes into each of the vendors and sort of weaknesses, some strengths and cautions, I should say, which might be really interesting to people. For those of you who aren't familiar with all of the different IaaS offerings out there, this is an interesting report to read up on.
It's pretty cool stuff. It's pretty eye-opening. It's always nice to see when this comes out. Really eager to see the paths when that comes out. and how they shape that up. I have my view on it, and I'd like to see what they say about it.
Yeah, I've got my view on it too.
I mean, I just not rose-colored glasses. It may be rose-colored glasses, but it seems Microsoft just seems to be the best PaaS offering for that's out there.
It is in our world, right? It is in the Microsoft world, but there are a bunch like Heroku and others that I don't know enough about that, when you try to compare apples to apples, they might be up there,
Yes, they are. It is more, I still think the majority of the people that are out there that are using the Microsoft PaaS offering are more on the Windows stack, as much as Microsoft is working harder and harder to open themselves up to everyone else. I think that the default, the more I've been playing in like the Angular space and the Node space, I do see most of those people do gravitate first over to AWS, but they do it for IaaS. They don't do it for PaaS. And so I'm really curious to see what Gartner says about PaaS offerings.
Yeah, for sure. I know that's kind of, as much as I love cloud and IaaS stuff, like the future is PaaS in my view. So show us the PaaS.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. How about you? Let's move on.
Speaking of PaaS.
Yeah.
I did a blog post earlier this week, I think, or last week. I'm not sure when it was.
You blog?
I blog. I do.
All right, cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just started last month. I use this term that I've been using in a couple different presentations at conferences and other places, a term that I coined as ePaaS, and it's around Office 365. And I mean, just to stand on a soapbox for just a minute here, I'll put a link to the blog post. But in the past, I've stood there in front of people and I've said SharePoint is a development platform going all the way back to 2007, and I could still argue that is still true, but looking back at it, would I say say the same thing now? I'm like, probably not so much. You probably don't want to build applications on top of SharePoint. When we were trying to put data into SharePoint lists, I'd say, use it like a table. And, looking back at it, not the best idea.
Not now that the world's changed a bit since then, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that now, though, especially with what we've seen from Build and from Ignite, and seeing all the stuff that the Office 365 team is doing, I mean, to me now, specifically developers, should look at Office 365 as a dev platform. And when I say that in the sense of look at the different offerings that Office 365 has. And I treat it as the term that I call ePaaS, which is to me, it's enterprise platform as a service. Now, why do I say that? If you look at AWS or Azure, the PaaS offering is essentially giving a developer a bunch of building blocks to build an application. So you have websites, you have queues, you have service bus, you have storage objects, you have media services, caching, all that kind of stuff. All these different tinker toys that you'd want to pull out of a toolbox to build an application. And to me, but they're all like the raw toys. They're all things like hammers and screwdrivers and sanders and stuff like that. But when you really want to start building something, like if you want to build a car, you're going to need something like a chassis, or you're going to need an engine. And to me, when I look at Office 365, I don't see SharePoint anymore with Office 365. I don't see Exchange. I don't see Link. And I think that it seems like a deliberate decision on Microsoft's part, because you see things now like in the app launcher, they're just called Mail, they're just called Calendar, they're called Sites, they're called OneDrive, they're called Files, and it's more that these things. SharePoint is no longer a product to me. SharePoint is a brand or a marketing term. And it's more a collection of all these different services. So now if I'm building an application and I need things like ability to have user profiles, or I need to have an ability for things like workflow, or I need to do metadata and tagging and taxonomy around my application. To me, I look at those things and say, as a developer, you should take a look at this stuff, because there's a lot of things that are out there. You guys put numbers up that showed a significant number of people that had switched over to Office 365 in the last few months, the last 12 months, the amount of data that's there. I mean, enterprises are there. You're building business applications for people, and you want to be able to integrate contextual data into the different applications. To me, now Office 365 is truly a dev platform. And from my point of view, I like to look at all the stuff that we have to offer. I treat them as things called ePaaS, which is just another service offering for an app developer.
Yeah, I read the blog post. I thought it was really good. It's kind of, you made a analogy, or not an analogy, you made a comment about why you don't think, not that it doesn't qualify as BaaS, which is what people have been firing around for things like backend as a service. That's more of like a set of services to help you build your application, like from a message bus and that sort of thing, a sort of point of view. But, your differentiation was there's a whole bunch of these enterprise services that you can take advantage of in 365 that app developers should consider.
Yeah.
I thought that's really interesting.
That was just my point. I mean, it's not for everyone, but it just seems to me like it is.
Yeah. On your topic, actually, you mentioned users and storage. I digress for a second here, but just for the benefit of listeners, at Build, we started talking about some more numbers around this, and we now have 50 million monthly active users, commercial users. So this is not including education, not-for-profit, or any other segments, I should say. This is just commercial users, 50 million monthly active users.
Wow.
So this is businesses, small businesses and large businesses combined, everything that fits into that commercial user category.
Yeah, I saw Julia White had some numbers that were shown on a slide during her session that you kind of co-did with her at Ignite. It said it was titled Office 365 Scale. It said 80% of enterprises are using Office 365.
Yep.
It said there's 4 trillion emails in Office 365, 470 petabytes of storage. Now, this one, I thought that there was a bit of a typo. It says 830 monthly meetings. That was million, right?
Yeah, that was million. So 830 million meetings a month are created in people's calendars. That's like 23.7 million meetings a day or something.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to just kind of go on a soapbox for a second about that, because I've gotten a bunch of questions about it, and I thought that I know we talked a little bit about it in the Office 365 Developer Podcast earlier this week, and I said that I would talk about it here, so now I've talked about it here. Check.
Yeah, nice. Hey, so I've got another report we can yap about. Last year, actually, we covered the same report in the Cloud Show. It's called the Nasuni 2015 State of Cloud Storage Report. I should find out what episode we talked about it last year, and so people can go back and listen to that. But this is a company, Nasuni, who put out a sort of an industry report each year, and they benchmark speed, availability, and scalability of cloud storage providers. So they've done this in the years before, and last year we covered it in the podcast. We'll link back to that. But they've just put out a new report, and so you can go and get this. We'll put a link in the show notes. I guess for these purposes, you could start at nasuni.com, nasuni.com. And it basically goes through and sort of vets all of the different cloud storage providers in terms of speed, availability, and scalability. And to cut a long story short, they've crowned Azure as the highest performer in storage again for the second year in a row. But there's a little more nuanced detail to it than this. So they grade sort of the 3 leading cloud storage providers or partners. They did Azure's Blob Storage, Amazon's Simple Storage Service, or S3, and Google's Cloud Storage. And that Microsoft came out as the highest performer, particularly in benchmark tests. Amazon, as expected, is a close second and edged out Microsoft in some aspects of scalability and availability. And Google continues to show promise, albeit without significant difference from its 2013 status.
Ouch.
Yeah, I thought those weren't my comments. I just read them verbatim from the report. Hey, we like you, but you haven't improved.
Yeah.
So, sort of briefly summarizing, what they do, they've been comparing a bunch of these things for a number of years, their speed, availability, and scalability. The report goes into how they test this, but for things like speed, for example, they do writes and reads and deletes on seeing how fast these things happen. And in varying different sizes of files and concurrency and things like that. So they do a whole bunch of reads and writes and deletes. Availability, they do over a period of time. So they ran this report, I think, from October last year until February. Yeah, so October 2014 until February 2015. And they do things like write randomly generated files, read randomly selected previously written files, and deleting particular files and making sure that that those operations succeed. And they do this from a variety of different locations. So, for example, they'll do tests from Azure writing to S3, for example, so that, because some storage partners, or some providers, they optimize for, if you're doing something from a VM that's hosted in their environment, then writing to their stuff is going to be obviously a lot quicker because you've got, various different backhaul optimizations and things like that take place in the data centers. So they try to do it from outside that provider, which I thought was, a little more real world, I guess. For not all scenarios, obviously, but some scenarios. In terms of the results, so in terms of the write benchmark, they split it between small and large files, right? So small files they consider below 1 megabyte, and large files they consider larger than a megabyte. And so in the smaller files, Microsoft leads the way, the top write performer excelling in 13 of the 23 individual combinations tested. So for that's for less than a megabyte files. So it was Microsoft, then Amazon, and then Google. And in terms of from best to worst, so Microsoft is about double their benchmark in terms of speed than Google was, and Amazon was sort of roughly in the middle of them. And then, but for larger files, it's quite a different story. And so larger files greater than a megabyte, Amazon is ahead of both Microsoft and Google, who are almost level pegged for second place in the larger than 1 megabyte writes. Then read performance, index read speed with all file sizes. So Microsoft is definitely ahead, but only by sort of 20% over Amazon versus Google, which is in a little way behind that.
I noticed that it seemed like on the read benchmark too that Amazon still beats out all of them pretty substantially on the writes. It's interesting how Amazon's better with well, they call large files. It's funny, 1 meg is considered a large file these days, but
yeah,
is curious though.
Yeah, and then deletes is kind of interesting too. And then Microsoft stomps on everybody in terms of deletes, twice as quick.
Twice as fast as Amazon and 5 times as fast as Google.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy, huh?
That is crazy.
So if you want to delete a lot, do it in blob storage in Azure.
Yeah. It's a cool report though. It's got really good graphs and charts and everything. It kind of showing you the differences between them. They did a really good job with this.
Yeah. So that's reads and writes of files. Then availability they did over a 30-day period and talked about response times and things like that. And Amazon does really well. Amazon and Microsoft are pretty close, in fact. And then Google seems to be quite a way behind, 5 times as slower. I mean, let's be fair to them, right? We are talking about the difference between 0.1 of a second and half a second, right? Which is an eternity in computing. Mm-hmm. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not the end of the universe, I guess. It depends on your workload, what you're trying to achieve, I guess. But, we are only talking about the difference between 0.1 of a second and 0.5 of a second.
Yeah, the numbers start to get, you kind of have to start to ask yourself, does stuff really matter at a certain point where, I know the next section, they talked a little bit about scalability, and it shows how Microsoft in terms had a very big variance in terms of the scale. But there was one part where it said that Amazon had write errors at an average rate of, make sure I get this right, 0.000005%. So that's not 5%. That's a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent.
Yep.
Actually, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent.
Is it a millionth of a percent? No, it's a 100,000. It's 5/100,000ths of a percent. There you go. I think, yeah.
But they're better than last year. It's right.
Hey, that's infinitely worse than Google and Microsoft, who showed 0 write errors.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, actually, the scalability one is interesting because it basically says, it's basically saying, what's the variance between low numbers of objects and high numbers of objects, and does it vary a lot? And Microsoft had a massive variance, exceptionally large variance, to quote the report, and was the worst of the 3.
Yeah.
So I guess that means, let me quote it here. It says, in previous reports, we measured scalability resilience using 3 metrics. 1, the variance of write speed in writing 100 million objects. That's for your photo library, AC.
Yeah, I have a few.
2, the number of write misses, and 3, the number of read misses. And so kind of that's overall how they measure scalability.
Yeah.
Oh, except they say one more dimension this year, the trade-off between variance and write speed. I don't know what that means.
Measured as objects per second squared. No, I don't. I have to think about that one. I'm not really sure what they mean by that.
I think that means...
This is one of those moments when someone who is listening to the podcast can think about it for a second and they hear us kind of fumbling it and they're like, oh, they didn't figure it out. Like, well, yeah, by the time you listen to it, I figured it out.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody smarter than us will fix this.
Yeah.
So yeah, overall, they say that Azure came out on top, consistently performed better than Amazon, best speeds across small and medium-sized files, and in some cases beat Amazon by nearly 2x. But for large files, Amazon showed better write speed and read performance.
Cool.
So I guess it depends what you're doing.
That's an interesting report.
They've actually got a nice appendix with a whole bunch of raw data and statistics in there, so you could see how it's all made up for each of the providers. And let's just make sure we're 100% clear that this is only talking about cloud storage. Only talking about blob storage in Azure and files in S3, and obviously Google storage.
You know what's interesting? When you look at the appendix, this is really interesting. When you look at the appendix, when you look at Azure, it appears that with write, read, and delete benchmarks, there were no tests with 100 meg files or gigabyte files, but there were with S3 and with Google. So I wonder how they came up with, I mean, I know they said, 1 meg is a big file, but
yeah,
you only looked at 1 meg and 10 meg files with Azure. You didn't look at the other ones. And
is there some sort of limit? Oh yeah, here we go. Microsoft Azure Blob Storage does not support objects larger than 64 meg in a single upload.
Oh, well, never mind.
That'll be why. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers too. You can see, the number, the difference in Azure and AWS. That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Hey, so we'll link off to all of these reports and articles that we've spoken about. We've got the Gartner Magic Quadrant, the Nasuni State of the Cloud Storage Report, and any other news items we spoke about. We'll get those linked to off in the show notes so people can go have a full read of them themselves.
There you go.
Hey, one last thing before we wrap up. I started a Flipboard magazine where we're collecting a whole bunch of, where I'm putting a whole bunch of articles that I read, news articles and things like that. So if you're a Flipboard user, then definitely hit up this blog post, the podcast page on our website, and we'll link off to my Flipboard magazine you could follow if you want to get a whole bunch of Microsoft Cloud and related news through Flipboard.
Yeah, we put these links out through Twitter, but we also put them out through the @MS Cloud Show handle, but we also put them up in the Flipboard. So
yeah.
Another medium where people can take a look at this stuff.
Exactly.
Awesome, man.
Thanks, AC. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, man. Take care.
If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text or record it as a WAV or MP3 and provide a link so we can play your question on the show. You can subscribe to us in iTunes by searching for Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find a full transcript and show notes of each episode. You can also find us on Facebook, searching for Microsoft Cloud Show, or on Twitter @MS Cloud Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.